Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. We are at the 2033 All Star break, and the season is going really well for Buffalo. 55 and 34 record, tied with the Toronto Blue Jays for the best record in baseball. And we are 5 games up on the Washington Nationals in the NL East. 8-2 record over our last 10, including 4 wins in a row. So we have been playing some of our best baseball of the year here in the early stages of July. We talked about the potential for the trade deadline at the end of our last episode. Appreciate the thoughts and comments on that from several viewers over the last day and a half or so. I do agree that potentially adding a big bat or potentially adding a big starting pitcher are the obvious things that we can do or that we should try to do. Unfortunately, I've been playing around a lot looking at those things, and there's not any real good options available either on the trade block or not on the trade block. I know some of you are also opined on Shamar Badio, who is by far the top player available, a 26-year-old second baseman who has been an excellent hitter at the major league level. Thought there was a chance that because he's very unhappy with how things are going in Milwaukee and because of his personality quirks and the fact that he is a disruptive presence in the clubhouse, that with the fact he's going to start making really big money next year when he becomes arbitration eligible, that the Brewers might be willing to dump him and not necessarily dump him, but might not be looking for top dollar for him. But they are still looking for a crazy haul for him. So although adding a bat like that would certainly help any team, given that we'd have to give up several of the top prospects in our system to even get close to bringing him on board, and he does have some personality quirks, I don't think we are going to head down that route right now. So I think over the near term, we're just going to try to make a couple of minor trades. Some of you have noted, and I agree with the fact that at this point, Willy Adames, although we want to have that captain personality on our team, is not really serving any role besides delivering that captain personality to us. You can see he's played in just 11 games, has just 24 at-bats on the year, and hitting just a $125. So we have made a trade offer for another captain personality that could be an interesting trade. And we've also made a trade offer for a left-handed reliever, which I think is the one potential need that we have right now. No lefties in the rotation, only Sean Sullivan and Kyle Backus as lefties in the bullpen right now because of that brutal injury we suffered earlier in this season to lefty two-way player, young stud Juan Estrada. So that has damaged us. So I've made an offer for a captain personality, and I've made an offer for a left-handed pitcher. We'll hear back on those very shortly. Another suggestion that I did get was, given that the trade market is a little bit weak at the top end and we have tons of money available, I believe it was Stanley Rosella who suggested including a fair amount of money in some of these trade offers to avoid having to include some players. It was worth a try. So far, I have not had too much luck with that. So my hope is maybe we get these 2 trades that I am thinking about now that I've made offers on done in the very near term, perhaps before we even get back the All-Star break, and then see where things go over the next couple of weeks. And maybe the prices on some players will change. Maybe some teams will fall out of the divisional and wild card races over the next couple of weeks and be a little more inclined to trade players away as we get closer to the deadline. I still would like to make a big move. This is a win now team going for a sixth consecutive playoff spot, nearing the end of the big contract that we have with Adley Rutschman. So the goal is certainly to try to win a title while we have him. If you were looking closely when I checked in on Estrada, you probably noticed that we did put Rutschman on the IL. He's banged up with knee tendonitis, going to impact him for 2 weeks. Doesn't impact his hitting or throwing, but is having a moderate impact on his running. And he's been playing through it for over a week at this point. And when we look at his game log, basically since he's suffered that injury, he's 1 for 14. So his batting average has dipped from 280 to 267 since the day that he suffered that injury. Having trouble running out some things. Also don't want it to become a long-term injury for him. So we're just going to put him on the IL. Obviously, we're in a bit of a lull with the schedule for the next few days over the All-Star break. So 3 kind of free games there. And hopefully he'll be back perhaps for that series against the Red Sox. If not, certainly would hope to have him for Nashville and the Padres towards the end of the month. And one other thing I did want to check in on and share was something that I just noticed. If I can go to one of the many interesting screens. Was looking at our team's top prospects in Guadalupe Amezcua. I'll come up with a bunch of pronunciations for that, but is our top prospect. And I said to myself, who the heck is Guadalupe Amezcua? I don't remember signing him. But this is a fortunate circumstance. He was a scouting discovery of ours less than 3 months ago, and he is viewed as the number 17 prospect in baseball. Looks like he could have a potentially excellent bat. 70 contact, 70 home run power, and 70 I is quite a combination. Listed as a shortstop. I don't think he's really a shortstop at the major league level. Could be an excellent first baseman with those defensive ratings and his 6'2" height. Looks like he could also be a corner outfielder. Obviously, we could play him at second or third if we needed to. So, not a great defensive player, not tons of speed, but a potentially excellent bat, not a bad personality. And I do think that investing heavily in scouting and investing heavily in the international aspect of scouting is less important in OOTP 24 than it has been in previous versions, simply because there are just so many players who go through international amateur free agency now that that seems to be where the most of the top prospects come from. And having scouting findings of big-time players is just mathematically a little bit rarer now, with the fact that there's 120-ish prospects every year who are coming in through the IAFA situation. But it's still an area that we tend to invest very heavily in. The majority, or not the majority, but the largest amount of our scouting budget does go into international scouting. We've got a scout who's outstanding with internationals, and we still also have a relatively large scouting budget. So still an area that we invest in. Has not paid huge dividends thus far in this playthrough, but the hope perhaps now is that maybe with the addition of the youngster, the number 17 prospect, Guadalupe Amezcua, that we've got a finding by our scout that could turn into something great over the next 5 to 10 years. And with the addition of him, that gives us 7 top 100 prospects, and all of a sudden our minor league system ranks 5th out of 32 in baseball. So a big jump in the rankings by how some of our players have performed thus far this year, and the addition of Guadalupe into our organization. And we've got almost back on both of the trade proposals that we made that I had talked about. And I'll talk about the less interesting one first, and the one that will probably generate less discussion from frequent viewers and commenters of this series. We just have to give up minor league second baseman Trevor Story, who is in our organization this year, just kind of playing out his career, to pick up the 32-year-old left-handed pitcher Brandon Noriega from the Dodgers. They'll pay 70% of his contract this year. He is in line to make $3.6 million next year. I don't think there's even a guarantee that we would have him back next year, but it is another left-handed arm, and it is an arm that's a little better against lefties than he is against righties. And you look at what Noriega has done at the major league level over the course of his career, and he has certainly been an above average arm out of the bullpen with more than a strikeout per inning. So the fact that we can basically get him for just about nothing, because Trevor Story is clearly not a big part of our future, just a guy who we signed near the end of spring training to give us some organizational depth. Happy to give him up, and it looks like we basically just need to include one other garbage player with him to get the deal done, which makes me think that potentially we might not even need to add in anybody else. Yeah, and we can just complete it right like this. So we are going to go ahead and bring Noriega on board to be a left-handed arm out of our bullpen, give us at least a third lefty to have in the pen, given that we don't have a lefty in the rotation at this point. Clearly, if we can add a big-time left-handed starter at some point over the next 2.5 to 3 weeks before the trade deadline, that would be a huge acquisition for us. But as I said earlier in the episode, that top-line starter, even if it's an old guy, similar to the Verlander and Scherzer trades we've seen in real baseball over the last week or so, just doesn't seem like anyone who's fitting that profile is available for anything near a reasonable price right now. And it's kind of unfortunately a similar thing with the big batter. So my hope is there's still time to do something later, but it's not inconceivable to me that this left-handed arm that we're adding and this captain personality that we're thinking about adding could be the extent of our action for this year as we approach the trade deadline. And if that's the case, we're going to have gone through a year with not spending a lot of the cash that's been available. But as I said, we've got the tied for the best record in baseball. We're doing well on the field. I'd love to put it into a guy who's in the final year of his contract that a team wants to dump who can help us win. But right now, it just doesn't seem like the right opportunity is out there. And to make room for our new acquisition, we've got a tough cut to make. But David Aranya, who was a Rule 5 acquisition of us a couple years ago, was up with us the whole year in 2031 when we had to keep him up. Spent all of last year in AAA. He's been respectable this year, more than a strikeout per inning. His ERA plus is below average, but his FIP minus is well above average. But as I mentioned, he's a guy that still has 2 option years left. He's kind of a generic right-handed reliever for us. So Aranya, to me, is the guy that we are going to send down to AAA Albany. Jaden Hilaire is a Rule 5 guy this year that we've got to keep up, who's also been pitching pretty well. And Yohane Varejo is a rookie who does have options, but he's been better than Aranya, and I think is potentially a more important player for us for the future. So we are going to keep him up as well. And that will give us the opportunity to move Mr. Noriega onto our 40-man roster and into our bullpen. As I said, gives us a third left-handed arm, which should be helpful. And now it is time to talk about the more interesting trade, the much more expensive trade, the trade that will bring us back a captain if I make it, and the trade that will also bring us back a very familiar player for those of you who've been involved in this playthrough over the last couple of months at this point. Free agent signing by us, who we thought that by this time was going to be a perennial all-star catcher in our system. And he unfortunately never developed to the extent that we had hoped in our system. We ended up trading him to Philadelphia in a deal several years ago at this point, January of 2027, so 6.5 years ago in game time, is the centerpiece of the trade that brought us Andrew Painter, who has been a solid reliever for us over the years, or a solid starter for us over the years, and was a excellent reliever for us last year. He is stuck as a backup in Philadelphia, so he is very unhappy with his role on the team, or he's very unhappy overall. He's angry with his role on the team. Unfortunately, he will be a backup for us if we bring him on board, at least for the next year and a half or so, while we still have Adley Rutschman as our starting catcher. But Medina could eventually be Rutschman's replacement. The gap power and the avoid strikeouts are always going to be an issue with him. The gap power you almost don't care about because he's so slow. Even if he had great gap power, he wouldn't be generating a lot of extra base hits. But he still could be an above average player as far as his contact, his home run power, and even his eye. He's durable. He's got that captain personality that we talked about. And he is an excellent defensive catcher. So my thought is if we bring him on board as our backup for the next season and a half, we've got a captain personality, so we can potentially move on from the somewhat useless shell of Willy Adames at this time. And by the time Medina is going to be arbitration eligible, we'll likely be looking to move on from Rutschman. But because Medina will have been a backup for the last couple of years, that first year, particularly when he's arbitration eligible, it's not going to be a pretty big number. Over the course of his brief major league career, he's been an above-average offensive player, even though he's below average this year. He's just not getting a lot of playing time, which is a player who's almost 26 and who's still not fully developed isn't great. It is kind of odd that the Phillies promoted him from high A ball to the majors last season because he's only played in 57 games over the last year and a half. Part of it, I think, is because he's been in the minors so long that he's out of option years, and they probably didn't want to risk someone picking him and taking him off of their team if they tried to option him for the minors or left him exposed in the Rule 5 draft. So his tortoise-like pace of development has kind of pushed him in this situation where he's almost 26 years old and he's not completely developed, and it's hard to get him the playing time to completely develop him. But if we bring him on board, we'll get him a little bit of playing time the next couple of weeks while Rutschman is out. So the big question is, what do we need to give up to potentially bring on Andres Medina? The easiest piece is our backup catcher, 33-year-old Ivan Herrera. No need for having him on the team if we bring Andres Medina on board. So that was easy. The middling part is right-handed pitcher Dan Delaria, 13th round pick in 2029. Looks like a borderline-ish prospect to me. His stuff and his movement could both be major league quality. The issue seems to be his control, and he's walked 88 batters in 85 and a third innings this year. I do like his high work ethic, his intelligence. I don't know how many of you have noticed this, but it looks like there's also a financial ambition is now listed as a personality trait. I don't know if that's replacing greed or in addition to greed, but I've noticed that over the last couple of days. I'm guessing since the last update of the game. If it's a replacement for greed, I guess maybe they thought greed was a pejorative term or something, and financial ambition is a much more delicate and politically correct way to put that. And if that was really what they're doing here, to me it's just another sign of the decline of how soft we've become as a civilization. But I will get off my soapbox. But anyways, Dan Delaria is not greedy. So I don't mind giving him up. The key guy in the deal is left fielder Ron Brady, a second round pick from 2 years ago. He was a monster in rookie ball for us last year, hitting .343. Promoted him to A-ball this year. He's hit .239 with 8 home runs. He's hurt right now with a fractured hand. Like that he's above average speed-wise, like that he is a competent corner outfielder. And if he fully develops, his bat is useful. But I don't think he's a future star. And given the number of good outfield prospects we have in our organization, even though Brady is certainly a guy who can contribute at the major league level, I don't mind including him. He's a guy that we've been trying to use in trades for probably a season or two now, just because we're so deep in the outfielders that we've drafted and picked up in IAFA over the last several seasons, that I don't see a guy like Brady having huge value for us. And he's not a horrible prospect, so he does have a little bit of value. And then clearly the last guy we have to add in is a big-time major league player or a big-time prospect, but there's also a couple of less interesting players that they're looking for. And I think we're going to include Edgar Alejandre, 22-year-old who's in rookie ball for us. Nice personality, and he's hitting .333 in rookie ball, but you look at those ratings and he certainly does not have a future at the major league level. So happy to include Alejandre. So the other component of this trade that I haven't talked about, that I will right now, but before I do that, I am going to just go ahead and add in Edgar Alejandre, and I am going to complete this trade, whether you like it or not. You can't make me not do it. So we have brought Mr. Andres Medina on board, and he is now our backup catcher. He will be the starting catcher for the next couple of weeks while Rutschman is out. But the other piece of this that I've touched upon is that we will be moving on from Willy Adames. I am guessing that there is not going to be much of any interest in him. Shopping him is a trade object. Yes, we can take back a massive contract from somebody on a mediocre to horrible player. So we will most likely, I'll go through the list just to be careful before I cut him, but we will most likely be looking to waive and DFA Mr. Adames rather than trading him and bringing on a potentially bad contract. If Colby White was a lefty, he'd be marginally interesting to us. But the other piece of this is that when we move on from Mr. Adames, what that will allow us to do is find a roster spot for one of the top prospects in our system, Joe Edwards, who has struggled in one way this year in AAA, hitting just .225, but he still has 27 homers in 306 at-bats and 74 walks in 90 games for a 134 WRC+. So although his production is down from a year ago, he still doesn't have much to prove in AAA. And he has made some strides, at least according to the last scouting report we got from our scout, in terms of avoiding strikeouts, at least his ability on that front. He's still struck out 113 times this year. But he's pretty much trained up everywhere in the infield, and he's close to what he's going to be in the outfield. But with the fact that there is not an obvious hitter for us to add through trade, I think moving on from Adames and bringing on Andres Medina also allows us to get Edwards up. And I think part of the reason he could be performing so poorly by some metrics this year is just his frustration with being in AAA, because he's angry about his role not being in the majors. So what I'm thinking is Edwards may be the bat that we trade for at the trade deadline by opening up the spot in the roster by moving on from Willy Adames. We've still got our captain personality with Medina. If we find a bat that we can trade for over the next 2.5 weeks, we can always send Edwards back down to AAA or make some other move. But if not, we've added a guy who at the very least should hit some home runs for us and should also draw a lot of walks for us at the major league level. So I'm going to see if there's anything to do trade-wise with Adames. From a quick look through there, I didn't think there was anything that seemed compelling. I think our best bet is probably to just waive and DFA him, and if he accepts the assignment to AAA, we'll keep him in the organization. If he doesn't accept it, we will just thank him for his service to our team and let his career unfold as it will unfold away from us. And the most interesting potential trade object that I was able to find was Ronnie Mauricio from the Mets. Another guy with a captain personality, as it turns out, a still productive major league bat. The issue is he's signed to an awful contract at over $30 million a year for 5.5 more years if he exercises that player option. I would only be interested in doing this if the Mets would keep a huge portion of his contract, and even asking them to keep 60% of it. They said there was no one we could add into a deal to make it work. So he would have been another bat we could have brought on board. But I think that Adames is probably better as somebody that we just let go than taking on a really bad contract in return. And the one other guy that I did think about was someone who we actually have looked at as a free agent and or on the trade block over the past couple of years, and that's Jose Ferrer, who is a left-handed reliever that could help us. Over the course of his major league career, he's been an above-average left-handed arm. He is someone whose splits actually suggest he's a bit more effective against right-handed pitching, which is not optimal. And he's also just got an awful personality. So given that we've made the trade for Noriega, I don't feel that I want to really disrupt what is at this point a pretty positive situation in our clubhouse. Now, granted, we're going to be making a big move taking Adames out, since he's been a big part of the excellent team chemistry and cohesion that we have. But the hope is that Medina fixes that, or at least keeps that going well. So I realize I am messing with our clubhouse by getting rid of our veteran captain, but I don't know that bringing on a guy with a pretty negative personality is the best decision. And we're also in a situation with the fact that we sent Aranya down. We don't have another obvious guy to send down. Our pitching staff has been pretty good. So I believe that the right move is to waive and DFA Mr. Adames. And that means that Joe Edwards is going to be coming back to the major leagues. And the addition of Mr. Edwards maybe is going to be the, hopefully going to be the big bat that we add ahead of the trade deadline this year. Obviously, I'm going to keep looking, but I'm not optimistic that we're going to find the guy that we are looking for, either in terms of a pitcher or an everyday player in the trade market this year. And we've updated our roster and our lineups to reflect the additions of Medina and Edwards, the departure of Adames, and the move of Rutschman to the IL. Just to be clear, I don't know and don't have 100% confidence that Medina will be our starting catcher in a year and a half when we likely move on from Rutschman. There's a chance he could be that good, and given what we had to give up, I am willing to roll the dice on maybe him reaching 90% of the rest of the potential that we think he has. But honestly, as a guy who's not going to be making money for the next few years because of the way his career has evolved, with that captain personality and that durability and that excellent catcher ability, and the fact that he can hit a little bit, he is, in a worst case scenario, an excellent backup catcher for us for the next 4 or 5 years till he potentially hits free agency, with the potential that if somehow in his mid-20s the development just really kicks in, he could become a decent starter for us. So I don't think it's a guarantee that he's our starter in a couple of years, but I don't think it's impossible either. And we got a very rare achievement here with our first triple play in OOTP 24, a 9-6-3 fly ball triple play against the Pittsburgh Pirates. So we've been playing coming out of the All-Star break against the Pirates. We took 3 out of 4 against them. We've got Washington and Boston over the next week or so, and about that point, I think we should be close to potentially getting Klutchman back. Says that about a week left with his injury. Obviously, very, very early stages for Andres Funky Cold Big Baby Medina. 2 for his first 10 at-bats in Buffalo. Definitely did not think he was going to be almost 26 years old when he was making his major league debut with the Buffalo Wings when we picked him up many, many years ago. But the world works in mysterious ways, and we'll see what we can get out of Medina going forward. And as we get closer to the trade deadline, we've got a 7-game lead on the Nationals right now. Still 8-2 over our last 10, although we've obviously played several games since the last time we checked in. Also meant to mention that, and I think I mentioned this in a comment to a previous episode, but to Three Quarters Badgers' question about us running in Seifu not seeming to run as much as he had in the past, we did tick up his strategy settings a bit at the start of this episode. His speed down a little bit from what it used to be, but still a very proficient base stealer and base runner. So we've notched him up a bit as far as his willingness to steal in terms of his individual settings. You can see he's still tied for the league lead with 33 stolen bases with Gravel. They were tied at 30 at the start of this episode. But my assumption is that Seifu will probably end up leading the league just because we're going to be running a bit more. But you certainly look at Leighton Gravel's profile with the 80 speed and the 75 base stealing, and he is certainly going to be a strong competitor for stolen base titles with Mr. Seifu likely for several years to come. And back to Mr. Adames. He's refusing an assignment to AAA. We tried shopping him again. It's still basically just players with horrible contracts in teams not willing to eat many of those horrible contracts. So we are going to go ahead and release our former captain. We'll pay him out. Players disappointed to see him leave, but we've got Mr. Medina on board now. So hopefully team chemistry still seems pretty good. Seems like Medina's doing a good job as our captain. Interestingly, he's the only player that has a bad relationship with our bench coach. We didn't have anyone before we brought Medina on board, so that's a little bit odd. But it is what it is. We'll live with that going forward. It's July 19th. We got about 12 days till the trade deadline. Play out another several days and then see if maybe we can put another trade together. But I'm not necessarily optimistic that there's going to be a deal that we can get done, despite the fact that we've got a ton of money to take on salary right now. And Rutschman is now ready to come off of that brief IL stint. We had brought up Luis Campusano, who we signed as a minor league free agent about a year and a half ago. He had been in Albany for us the last couple of seasons. He did well in his minimal action, but obviously with Medina on the team now, Campusano is not the guy that we're going to keep up. Figured he was out of option years, but just wanted to check. A guy that we could end up losing. We've got enough depth in AAA with the catchers that we have that if he refuses the assignment or if he's claimed by somebody else, it's not the end of the world. Rutschman is going to come back in as our starting catcher, obviously, but we may try to see if we can at least get Medina some regular time at DH or something against left-handed pitching to at least get him in the lineup maybe 2 or 3 days a week between backing up Rutschman and also potentially playing DH from time to time against a left-handed pitcher. Want to get him some more at-bats than what Philadelphia had been doing with him at the major league level. So we've updated our lineups to get Rutschman back in as our everyday catcher. We are going to try to get Medina at bats, at least as our DH against left-handed pitching. Wanted to also check in quickly on Joe Edwards, since we've been talking about what Medina's done. And Edwards has been a monster in his first 8 games back in the majors. 15 for 34, 5 homers, and 12 ribbies in 8 games. a stupid 280 WRC plus and almost a win above replacement in those first 8 games. Certainly not expecting him to continue hitting at that pace, but good to see that his morale is now much better, that he's back in the majors, and hopefully he can have a more productive stint in the majors than he did when he was up with us a year ago. And we kind of had mixed results over the last week. We only won 1 out of 3 against Washington, which, given that they're the team that's second to us in the standings in the NL East, was not optimal. But we did go and sweep the Red Sox after that. We've got Nashville and San Diego, as I talked about, in our final 6 games. Before we do get to the trade deadline, 62-37, 626 winning percentage, still in a flat-footed tie with the Blue Jays for the best record in baseball. But we have opened up our lead on the Nationals to 8 games by virtue of the sweep against the Red Sox, while it looks like they were losing 2 of 3 in their series after we played them. And Seifu, with the increased frequency of trying to run, is now opening up a lead over Leighton Gravel as Deshaun Seifu tries to pursue a 6th consecutive year leading the National League in stolen bases, having another productive offensive season for us, hitting .301. The number of triples that he's had in recent years hasn't been as wild as I thought it would be, given his ability to make contact, his speed, his gap power, and the park that we play in. I thought he would be a perennial leader of the league in triples, and it looks like he's going to go a 4th straight year without leading the league in triples this year. But that said, although his contact and his gap power and his avoid Ks have all kind of settled in at about 70 in more recent scouting reports, when at one point in the future, or in the past, I don't know what the future was, but felt like he had 75 potential as far as his contact, which he's never really achieved. Still having a nice career for us, and we've still got him signed for at least 3 more years after this season to hopefully continue being a major contributor to our offense. And as we close in on the trade deadline, I've spent some time looking at the players who are on the trade block. One interesting player who was added, Joel Nelson, who's with our division rival Montreal Expos, but I'm guessing they are viewing themselves as borderline out of it, 11 games out in the division, and they're only 2 out of the wild card, so actually a little surprising to see him on the trade block. Certainly a bat that could help us, and he's in the final year of his contract, making $24 million. The Cubs actually have retained a big chunk of it, so we certainly could easily bring him on board. That bat would love to add it, but they are looking for a lot for him, and for a 2+ month rental. I'd love to have his bat, because even with the fact that we've brought Edwards up, bringing him on board would allow us to send Henry Allen down to the minors, who is kind of a generic bat, a generic corner infielder who's getting less playing time with us this season than he did last year when we had made him a Rule 5 pick. Wouldn't mind replacing Allen with somebody better, but they're looking for just exorbitant things for him, even though it's just a 2-month rental for us. The 2 guys that they'll trade straight up for him are Bobby Bolig, the new addition to our team, who's hitting .291 with 19 doubles, 14 homers, and a 129 WRC plus, and only 2 years into his career is going to be a relatively, hopefully, economical member of our team for the next several seasons. And the other guy that they would take for him straight up is the young pitcher and the guy who is now the second best prospect in our system because of the addition of the scouting finding, Sincere Shazier, who all he's done since he came up to Buffalo is go 4-2 with a 2.47 ERA, more than a strikeout per inning. I still don't know if he's an ace. I think in a perfect world he's a great 3 or a close to great number 2, but in our organization, it's probably just a matter of time till he is battling with Mr. Sabatka to be our number 1. And Sabatka, who made his first All-Star team for us this year, 11-1 with a 2.67 ERA in his second season in Buffalo. So we have kind of started turning over the rotation here. But as much as I would love to add somebody like Joel Nelson as a 2-month rental, the price of being somebody like a Shazier or a Bolig is just too high, and trying to put a package together with solid but not brilliant prospects, even including 3 or 4 of them, we just still need to put in a big time player for us. So as much as I'd love to add his bat, I don't see that happening. There could be a cheaper guy that we can try to bring on board. We'll keep investigating. As far as the pitchers, not as huge a need. Wouldn't mind a Jackson Fristow or a Cade Smith, but we really don't need them at this point. And when we think about the starters that are available, Javier Santos and Jackson Jobe look like the 2 most interesting to me. I guess Yuri Perez also fits a similar-ish profile. Guy who's got 2 years left on his contract, but he's not willing to waive his no-trade clause for us. And then even just a guy like Jackson Jobe, who is a solid starter, albeit fragile at this point. 2 years left on his contract, including a player option that he may or may not opt in. But, we've got to give up a pretty important member of our team or one of the top prospects in our system to bring him on board. And for a guy who's realistically a 4th starter for us, I just don't think the cost makes sense. So I'm going to keep investigating. And I've obviously been looking at guys who aren't on the trade block as well in terms of really stud pitchers. And the prices, not shockingly, for those types of guys are just exorbitant. So I don't know that we're going to do much else here as the trade deadline approaches, but I'm going to keep thinking about it. And I think I have pieced together a deal that we're going to make. Have to give up a couple of useless-ish minor league pitchers. The Brewers are looking to get rid of Miguel Vargas, who is way overpaid, but they are willing to retain most of his contract, which is the only thing that makes this palatable, because he's not in the final year of his deal, and there's no way he's anywhere near a $15 million player. I'd happily bring him on board this year without them retaining any of it, given the amount of money we've got to spend, but I don't want to ruin next year's budget to bring him on board. He is fragile. He is almost 34 years old, but he is an upgrade over Henry Allen as a utility infielder for us in terms of his bat. More versatile and better defensively. So it's not a sexy trade deadline for us. You know, we added a left-handed reliever to the bullpen, which we needed. We're going to upgrade a utility infielder to Vargas from Allen. We made a big upgrade potentially at another utility infielder to Edwards from Adames. And we made an upgrade at backup catcher to Medina from Herrera. And Medina, as we've talked about, does have some potential for the future. So I think all of the moves make us better as we try to win this year. But there's not that big shiny move that we would love to make in a year when we've got tons of money to spend. But I don't want to just destroy our farm system for a 2-month rental unless that 2-month rental is a absolute difference maker who is a huge addition in terms of potentially delivering us a title. And I don't think that type of player is out there. Certainly not on the trade block. And when I look at those kind of players on the trade market, the prospects and the players that they're just looking for, the price in my mind is too high. So I'd love to spend this money, but at this point, I don't think it's going to happen. I'll still check in again over the next few days before we get to the trade deadline. But at this point, I don't know what else we're going to do. And despite all the money we've got to spend, I think it's increasingly unlikely we're going to get something done. We just took 2 out of 3 against our fellow expansion team, Nashville. So that's always nice when that happens. With 3 games left until the trade deadline, we're up 7 on the Nationals, and we've slipped a game behind the Blue Jays for the best record in baseball. But up 7 on the Nationals, and as I noted, and that's up 7 also for the best record in the National League. So we certainly seem to be on target for achieving what we want to in the regular season with this team this year. Blue Jays just don't lose with 8 wins in a row. But another part of the reason why we may be done trying to get a trade is that Ohtani, who healed up from that injury more quickly than anticipated, is ready to begin a minor league assignment. I don't think he's a major league starter anymore, but he does give us some more optionality. And my hope is that at the very least, his bat against right-handed pitching is something that could potentially help us in September, if not before. So we are going to get him going on a rehab assignment. We're going to use him as a 2-way guy over the next week or two, just to see what he looks like as a pitcher and as a batter, and obviously get an updated scouting report on him. I would be surprised if he ever pitches for us again, but I'm at least going to get a look at him. And while here on July 31st, trade deadline day, we're not going to end up making a big deal, I did have just one proposed to me that I don't think I can say no to. You may remember we have Nico Hoerner in our organization. He's been with us for the last season and a half. He's angry that he's not in the majors, and he is the best defensive shortstop that we have, other than Tim Hull. Quite honestly, he might even be better defensively than Tim Hull, but not much of a bat. So he is our insurance policy in AAA, who would be the best defender we have in our system if Hull were to suffer an injury. So I don't love giving him up on a team that is win now, but I do have a couple guys, and I don't think Hull is going to be injured. He's normal in terms of his injury proneness, but he's been a pretty durable player for us over the years. But even if we moved on from Hoerner, we still have Oswald Peraza and Brooks Lee, who was taken from us in the Rule 5 draft, but Miami just sent him back very recently to us. He hasn't even played a game for us yet there. So we've got Bo Bichette, we've got two. I don't think we'd want to play him at short, but we've got veterans for infield depth in AAA Albany at this point. So although we would lose something defensively if Hull is hurt and we no longer have Horner in our system, one of the players that they're offering to us is just too interesting for me to let go. Minor league second baseman Luis Flores, who looks like a useless-ish prospect. 33-year-old minor league reliever Eric Torres, who is just organizational depth. But for some reason, they're offering us the 24-year-old left-handed pitcher Matthew Wenzel, who was a third-round pick in 2027. He's put up a 2.03 ERA in San Francisco this year. He's somehow considered the number 94 prospect in baseball, which I think is a little ambitious given that he is clearly just a left-handed reliever. But we need, or I don't know if we need, but it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to have another left-handed arm potentially under our control. He's going to be making the major league minimum for the next couple of years. And again, I don't think he is really one of the top 100 prospects in baseball. He looks like a decent left-handed arm out of the pen. But by the same token, to get him for a guy who's just organizational depth, who's 36 years old, I don't know how I say no to this. Obviously, I'm going to feel a little dumb if Hull gets hurt and we end up with a problem defensively at shortstop that Nico Horner could have potentially helped us with. But the chance to get a young left-handed reliever who looks like he could be really good for years to come and is, at least according to the ratings of OOTP, one of the top 100 prospects in the game. I just don't see how I can possibly say no to this, even though our assistant GM says it's hard to give a firm yes or no. To me, it's a deal that I've got to do. So we're going to go ahead and complete the trade, bring Wenzel on board, and hope that Hull doesn't get hurt over the last 2 months of the season and leave us with a big hole at shortstop where Horner could have helped us defensively. And with the fact that we've added Noriega and we have already sent down Aranya, we don't have an obvious guy to send to AAA. So perhaps oddly, for a guy who is 24 years old and has a 2.03 ERA in the majors this year and looks basically essentially completely developed, we're going to put Wenzel in AAA because he is option eligible. Clearly, if we have any injuries to the pitching staff, he would be the first guy that we would bring up, and we'll definitely be bringing him up to the majors on September 1st at the latest. We are going to add him to the 40-man roster, so he will potentially be eligible for the playoffs for us. I'm sure he's not thrilled about going down to the minors, although it looks like his morale is still good, although he's very unhappy with transactions. I don't know if that's going to the minors or being traded to us, but you would think that I guess the Giants were tied for first. I was going to say you would think going to a first-place team would make him happy, but he was technically on a first-place team tied with the Padres in the NL West when he was traded to us. But I see a deal like that hits my inbox once every 4 or 5 seasons, it seems, where the AI just really wants a player. Be interesting to see if on the Giants, if I assume that they moved Yeah, it doesn't look like they've even put what did they do with that trade was with the Giants, wasn't it? Yeah, it was with the Giants. So what did they do with Horner? I guess they haven't assigned him anywhere. He's at their rookie level ACL team, but presumably they're going to be looking to get him onto the major league roster to probably play shortstop for him down the stretch. I would have to assume if they're going to make a trade like that, unless the AI is just completely irrational, which is a concern and possible. Their shortstop right now is Alex Mooney, who's not as good defensively as Nico Horner, at least in terms of his range and his error rating, although he's got a pretty good arm. He's hitting 260 this year. He's above replacement level. His batting profile is certainly much better than Horner's is. So maybe they just view Horner as some organizational depth. Mooney, like Horner, is fragile, so maybe it just gives them a little bit of an insurance policy if they have some injuries. But it doesn't seem to me obvious why the Giants would make this trade, but that is not my problem. We have the young lefty, Matthew Wenzel, in our organization now, and we are headed into August. I don't think there's another deal in our future for this year. And we are past the trade deadline. We lost to San Diego 8-2 yesterday. So as August 1st begins, we have the team that we are going to be playing with. 65-40 record, still a game behind the Blue Jays for the best record in baseball. But we are 7 up on the Nationals and 6.5 up on both the Padres and the Giants for the best record in the National League. So at this stage of the season, the goal is obviously to end up with the best record in the National League at a minimum, and certainly would not mind if we're able to get by the Blue Jays for the best record in baseball when all is said and done. But we'll find out how the end of the season goes in our next episode. As I said, anything less than the best record in the NL is going to be a disappointment. And the hope is going to be to keep this team as healthy as possible after all of those trades that we've made over the final couple months of the season, and see if this can finally be the team in Buffalo that gets past the NLCS and into a World Series. And we'll find out how we're going to be seeded for the playoffs, assuming that we do end up making the playoffs, in our next episode. Until then, if you've got thoughts on the trades, would love to hear what you think. I know that some of you are going to be knocking your head against the wall that we didn't make a big trade at the trade deadline, but the value just was not there to me. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes, but I think we're a better team than we were at the start of the episode, even though we didn't make the huge splash that I had kind of hoped might emerge. So until our next episode, thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.